Hi, welcome to Artist and Critic. I'm Don Gruen. Well, today we have an extremely versatile and interesting guest. He's Mr. John Gruen, well known as a critic of both art and dance. And I can mention some of his contributions. He is a contributing editor to Art News magazine, also a contributing editor to Dance magazine, as well as a frequent contributor on the dance to the Sunday New York Times. But that doesn't end Mr. Gruen's contributions as yet. He also has a weekly radio program on the dance on WNCN on Sundays from 10 to 11 p.m. And in addition to even that, Mr. Gruen is also the author of many books. His latest one on Giancarlo Menotti, the composer, published by Macmillan, and I understand the book is just out, Mr. Gruen.
Yes, it has just come out, and I'm thrilled about it.
How did you happen to write a book on Mr. Menotti? You've written a number of other books. Perhaps I can mention those also by Mr. Gruen. The New Bohemia, Close-Up, The Private World of Leonard Bernstein. Incidentally, New Bohemia is a book about the culture of the 60s, both art and social culture. Close-Up interviews with artists
Artists and musicians and filmmakers, all of these young people coming up in the arts.
Right. And The Private World of Leonard Bernstein, as we mentioned, and The Party's Over Now, a discussion with, did you actually interview the artists?
I did.
You knew them all.
I knew them all.
Abstract Expressionists.
The Pollocks and the Franz Kleins and all of these artists of the 50s. And it's sort of about the decline of abstract expressionism.
How did they feel about the decline?
Well, they were miserable, of course. I mean, except for those who became masters like de Kooning, and whose work was beginning to be bought, and they got thousands and thousands of dollars, still do, for their work. But a lot of them were self-destructive individuals. And I suppose most of them have died since. Theirs was not a particularly happy existence in the 50s, because they struggled so much to get where they finally arrived. That's right. The struggle of being an artist at the time was much harder than I think it is today. Then when they finally did hit their stride, and abstract expressionism did become the first major American movement, which became world-renowned, at this point, they were sort of tired of the struggle, and while they were able to reap some success and some good fortune, they were burnt out, and a lot of them, some drank, and some, it was a sad period, actually.
Were they suffering so much? Why did they have to struggle so much? Because American art wasn't respectable in a sense? It hadn't. And was society repressive toward them? I've always seen them as fighting to assert their individuality in this kind of gray 50s, this gray time.
Exactly, yes. What happens to any artist, if an artist has a vision, and this artist plies this vision, he continues to be in his garret, in his studio, working, putting out his soul, so to speak, on canvases or pieces of sculpture that nobody will look at, that no museum director will be interested in, no gallery dealer has the slightest interest in, let alone the public. Then, of course, you go to pieces. Still, if you persist and if this vision is strong enough, then ultimately, if you're lucky, in your own lifetime, perhaps something will happen. Well, in the case of the abstract expressionists, who were toiling in the 30s and 40s, when the 50s came around, things did begin to break for them. And the world did sit up and did pay attention. Critics did, to begin with. And people like Jackson Pollock and Rothko and de Kooning and Franz Klein and others found themselves suddenly with a style that was being recognized for the first time, not only by their peers and by their own country, but internationally. And this, after this long, long struggle, this then in some way went to their heads, or they went to pieces. They didn't know how to cope with it. Suddenly they were getting enormous sums of money for their work, and they had been used to not knowing where the next meal was coming from. So it was really a very strange phenomenon.
Well, people often say that success is even more dangerous or at least as difficult to cope with as failure in terms of not being recognized, because you can just totally lose control. Your connection with yourself and with ground zero, so to speak, the base of your existence can just be completely shattered. And we see many examples of people going off on tangents. I'm wondering, do you think in a sense that many of the, what I would call fashionable artists of today, do you feel that they maybe have too easy a success in terms of, at the age of 25, they're being given museum shows and that kind of,
yes, well, of course,
that kind of exposure?
You understand that the climate for art naturally has changed. The government has come into it. There are grants that can be applied for, which was not the case at the time of the abstract expressionists. So that young people have, on the one hand, an easier time of it, and on another, a very hard time of it. First of all, there are so many artists. I mean, there are so many people who want to become artists and make a contribution. In earlier times, there weren't that many artists. I mean, there were, but they were content to struggle in their own corner, so to speak. Today, I don't know of one young artist who doesn't want to be a star, who wants to really make it big because he has seen, he has watched the lessons of, let's say, an Andy Warhol, a Robert Rauschenberg, a Jasper Johns, people who are now in their 50s. Really, they made it big when they were quite young still.
They certainly did.
And so they say to themselves, why can't I do this? Well, the opportunities are there, and except that the point of view has altered. I sometimes ask myself if some of these young artists who are working in their lofts today are in it for the art of it and for the love of it, or are in it in order to just become overnight sensations, make a lot of money, get museum shows, be politic, know the right people, go to the right parties, be seen in the right places. And that's, of course, a little disturbing. And but what ultimately counts is their work. So today, I just get this feeling that there is a tremendous diversity of work, of styles. You don't know what, I mean, there's so much going on. There isn't any one direct style. I would say that today, one cannot point to America, for example, as being the champion of one particular style of painting.
Do you see, I don't see one single style. I agree with you. There's a tremendous variety of efforts, but I'm wondering if there isn't an impersonal overlay or a certain dehumanized or a very rational or a very cerebral overlay that covers almost all of the arts, whether it's from some of the mechanized sculptures of, say, Marc de Souvero, with using those I-beams which are used in construction, and then you think of the photorealists also being somewhat withdrawn from direct experience of life, working from the photograph, often using the airbrush, which is another mechanical thing. And then, of course, you think of hard edge painting and conceptual art and video art. And people talk about Xerox art today and computer art. And to me, those have become almost signs of artistic desperation. I mean, we don't know what to do. We can't make art from real life anymore, so we have to resort to our technological gadgets to see how do you
well, of course, I think that when one thinks of technological art or conceptual art or video art, there is something to be said for making use of one's what is available in the world today to make art with. I think that the television cameras, for example, indeed are a fabulous toy for artists. Nam June Paik, for example, has done very interesting work with television. Or with the potentials of television. And so that I think that the idea of experimenting with new gadgets, as it were, is exciting and should be done. The question is, how do people, respond to it? I think that the artists in those areas, they are involved. I think they wouldn't really spend an awful lot of time doing that, or conceptual art, without really feeling pretty passionate about it. The trouble with it, of course, is that exactly what you say, it's very impersonal. But then if one thinks of our world today as being an impersonal world, I suppose that's where art must lead them.
I'm wondering, shouldn't we try to transcend this
Yes,
depersonalization? In a sense,
we
when I
should.
see I always have felt that art is a place where we go to for refreshment, for re-inspiration, to
Yes.
continue the process of life, and it
Yes.
fulfills us and echoes all our innermost needs and feelings and yearnings and this kind of thing. And when it ceases to deal with these things and begins to simply reflect the harsh inhumanity, as I see it, of much of our civilization, then it doesn't give us anywhere to go. It just kind of constantly bombards us with these negative qualities.
Well, that is absolutely true. I agree. I think one of the best things that's happening in art today is that there are a number of young artists who have indeed turned their backs on anything that smacks of experimentation. And I think that if we go into galleries in Soho or go into any galleries, there is a good percentage now of young artists who are going back to the easel. Easel painting as we have known it in the 19th century, and simply put up still lifes, or taken the model, the nude, what have you, and begun to simply paint again in the old traditional way,
Rediscovering
the joy of applying pigment to canvas. This is an experience which there has been a large gap in, and and artists don't know how to handle the métier. And suddenly they are rediscovering the 19th century and able to do it with a good deal of conviction.
Right.
That's the good part of today's art scene.
Exactly.
So that when we go into a gallery, it's
more.
nice, isn't it? You
Yes,
go
it
in, you
is.
see portraits and you see still lives and you
Right.
see, and some of them are damn good,
Yes,
really
exactly.
good, and
Right.
you are moved.
Exactly.
One thing that hasn't happened is for somebody to come out and make a really original statement within that context. And I suspect it's because they haven't gotten there yet.
It
They're too
takes
busy
time.
rediscovering the idea of doing a still life
Exactly.
and of doing a good
Exactly.
portrait. That's, I think, is perhaps coming up in the future, the business of the statement. The Picasso, the Matisse,
Exactly.
all of that, the Bonnard.
Exactly. Now, you are equally involved in dance. How do you see the contemporary dance scene comparing with the contemporary painting, sculpture world in terms of their significance? Is one ahead of the other at this point? Or how do
Well,
you
I
feel
would
about
say that experimentation exists, of course, on all levels of art. And I would say that there is tremendous amount of experimentation in dance, very much on a par with experimentation in art. For example, you go to some lofts and you look at what these boys and girls are doing, moving, and it has not, you've never seen that before on a stage. They are trying to somehow forge ahead, again, not imitate ballet as we know it, the traditional, Swan Lake and all those classical things that dancers do, but try to discover something that the body can do in terms of movement, which is totally new, which is different. So that, for example, they could stand on their heads and spit out nickels and call it a dance. You see?
Do you feel that? Again, I must say that I really don't know anything about dance. I like it and respond to it, but I don't know about it what I know about painting. But in a sense, while not putting any limit on any kind of experimentation, doesn't that in a sense kind of reflect this man becoming the technological automaton
Well, you
of
cannot
society?
become dehumanized with dance. That's all.
There's just no way?
There's no
Okay.
way. You know why? Because it involves the human
The body.
body.
I see.
I mean, you cannot call anything a dance unless, if you put robots on the stage, you might say, well, this is a robot dance. And there it is, and it's very impersonal. But basically, of course, you cannot dehumanize dance because dance involves the body completely, utterly, every part of it, from head to toe. And it is the most extraordinary discipline, and it's deeply connected with life, because to dance is to breathe, and
All the rhythms of life and the pulsation.
all of that, and to dance means to be alive. So you cannot dehumanize it, not in my opinion. If it's dehumanized, it's no good, in my opinion.
No, I was just wondering, just the few things that I have seen, I have seen some of them, not all of them, seem to be trying to express man's oppression by technology, modern. I keep hating to go back to this theme. I've discussed it several times on the program myself and with other people, but it seems like one of the dominant themes of our time is trying to remain human and feeling and
Well, it should
sentient.
do that. Yes.
Yeah, and sometimes I see movements that are deliberately expressive of rigidities and rectilinear movements and so forth.
You're talking about dance.
Dance, yeah.
Yes, well,
and it seems to oppress me to a certain
Well,
extent.
yes, well, that, of course, one has to go into matters of style. The thing is that when they do that, when dancers go away and become doing all these things you just mentioned, it really serves a purpose. I think that they want to reflect, the terrors of life, if you will, or, the cruelty, all of the bad things that you can think of, because of course the art does that too.
Sure.
Even in the best levels. I mean, if you think of Kata Kollwitz
Or Goya or something.
Goya, indeed. I mean, there they are, people being shot, and the terrors of life. Guernica. I mean, you cannot avoid that. I don't think you should. An artist should reflect the period in which he lives, and he must encompass. Like, dance isn't all about airy, fairy, beautiful, lovely,
Nymphs
shouldn't be
through the
that.
woods kind of thing.
That's right, and painting shouldn't be about
either.
pretty
No.
flowers and woods and the rainbow, and it's gorgeous and life is
Exactly.
beautiful. It can't. It mustn't.
It has to deal with truth,
That's
whether it's good or
absolutely.
unpleasant.
Now, there are ways of doing that, of course, which has value, or which is just simply silly. You can't do it.
Exactly. How did you become involved so deeply in the arts and dance and so forth? I mean, can you sort of tell us a little bit about John Gruen's life?
Oh, fabulous. I have a very peculiar background. I was born in Europe of an Egyptian father and a Russian mother,
Oh,
if you can believe that.
That's a great beginning right
Well,
there.
right there, you're finished.
Yeah, no, that's a great start right there.
So, and I was born in Paris, and then I was raised in Italy, believe it or not. My father was a journalist, as I ultimately became. And then when the World War II broke out, we were all shipped back, brought here to this
the
country. Safety of America, and I was exposed to New York City as a 14-year-old teenager, and I thought, oh, this is it. I mean, I loved it. I could not believe New York. It was just simply wonderful, teeming with the movies and the theater and art
Vitality and energy.
everything. The rhythm of it was just splendid. And then, of course, there was time to go to school and become an American, which I eventually did. Then I was also drafted in the American Army, which helped when I turned 18. And I was
In
not
time for Korea? Was it in time?
No, it was just. You mean a career in the army?
No, in time for the Korean War.
No. This was at the end of World War II.
End of World War II.
In fact, I was sort of drafted when it was all over. It was very strange, because no sooner did I get drafted into the army, but that the war was over and I was discharged honorably for doing very little. Anyway, then I went to college, and I chose the University of Iowa, of all places.
I got my master's degree from
You
there.
did,
Yeah,
and so did I.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't it
I didn't realize
amazing?
it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's my alma mater.
Yeah.
So much happened to me in Iowa. It was an eye-opener, because I got my degree in art history at the university. I married an Iowan girl who is an artist, and whose name is Jane Wilson.
Oh.
Do you know Jane Wilson?
Well, I know her painting, but I don't know.
She is my wife.
I didn't realize it.
Yes, and has been for 30 years.
Oh my gosh.
And
I'm learning a lot here. Just keep going, keep
that's
telling us
sick,
things.
right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so after that, I wanted to make my mark. I got my master's in art history, came to New York with my bride, who wanted to be a painter, and began to hustle. I worked at a bookshop at Brentano's, and I was dying to work on a newspaper, which by hook and by crook I eventually did, and landed as an art critic for the New York Herald Tribune. And for 6 years, worked there both as an art critic and a music critic, both.
You and Emily Genauer, were you the two critics?
Exactly, we were the two critics.
Okay.
And I was there until the demise of the Tribune. And then I was asked to do books, and from then on I was a freelance writer. Except that for about 5 years I worked as an art critic for New York Magazine. So I was very heavily into the art scene. And my wife also began to develop her career here. And here I am doing 50,000 things.
Now, someone told me, and it was just a rumor, and I don't even know if it's true, I didn't verify it before the program, but someone once said that you were so honest a critic at some place that you were let go from your post.
That was
Is
New
that
York.
true?
That was New York Magazine. Yes.
Now, how can that be? Can you
Well,
explain that to me? That's a very unsettling.
Well, it was pretty unsettling for me because it was very nice to appear every week in New York Magazine. No, it had to do with the editorial policy. You see, the editorial policy of New York Magazine at the time, when I was its chief art critic, was one where at the beginning, you know, I was let alone, as you should be, and I could write on anything, and I would write. And then towards the end of my tenure there, the editor, who shall remain nameless, but is no longer the editor of the magazine.
You wouldn't tell us who it was?
Well, it was Clay Felker. I guess everybody knows who that is. But the point is that he wanted very much for me to start going into the back rooms of art galleries and getting a lot of dirt on people. And I didn't want to do that. I mean, I wanted to not...
Rather than discuss art, discuss dirty personal or
well, you know,
seamy political.
You understand what I mean by dirt. I don't mean sex life.
I know, but I mean just,
you know, just
the machinations of the art
that's
world.
That's right,
that
the political world of the... Now, there are certain art writers who have a great facility for doing that, and in fact love doing that, sort of digging into, you know, stories about what's happening in the art world, and let's clean this up, and this is being corrupt, and this is being corrupt. But this editor wanted me very much to, you know, sort of like do things that I would ordinarily not do, you know, go to dinner parties and overhear
conversation. Be National Enquirer-ish about it.
A little bit like that.
Yeah.
And in effect, I complained bitterly. Naturally, as is I would do that, I cannot do that. I said, I want to write about art. I don't want to write about people who, you know, might be doing dirt on somebody or dumping on somebody. I don't do that. I can't do that. And so he said, well, that's our new policy. Goodbye. So I naturally left, and that was about 5 years ago.
Ken, I do want to say I think investigative reporting can be done on any field. I mean, and it certainly could be into the political and economic factors that control the art world as any other kind of world. But it sounds like this was, as I was indicating with the National Enquirer, it was a little bit gossipy, a little bit scandally, you know, just sort of.
All of that.
Yeah.
Yes, because you see, that's very much in, and it's also very much the style of New York Magazine. And of course, since then I haven't gone near it because it's the kind of magazine that just doesn't interest me in that way.
Can critics be honest? I mean, be totally honest?
Well, I don't know if anybody can be totally honest. You know, you have to remember that writing on any art form, there is only one person behind the typewriter. Only one single individual, and to be a critic already means that you are biased in a certain sense.
As just being yourself.
That's right. You have to. I mean, your values are your values. It's not your values, and it's not anybody else's values. It's what you think. Now, of course, a critic should be informed. He should know what he's talking about, and he should, you know, not just make foolish statements. But basically, he has to be true to himself and respond to art as honestly and as openly as he can. I try to do that when I write or talk about art or dance. But there is no such thing as being completely honest. I mean, one is as honest as one can be, and one hopes to be. But I think honesty is relative.
Aren't there some magazines, I've written a little bit, nowhere near as extensively as you have, and I always feel that rather than make a clear-cut, straightforward statement about an artwork, an artist, their positive and negative contributions, and their place within the art world, you know, not just talking about the work, but examining it within the context of the world, the art world and the world at large, so it's not this isolated phenomena. But it seems that there are, I don't know if it's many people, you can tell me that prefer the artist to more or less just work at it with sort of velvet paws rather than reaching out for truth, in a sense. Not meanly or hostily or attacking anyway, but they want you to veil your writing, with and your opinions with the sort of the soft marshmallow coating. If I can,
That's true. Yes, it's perfectly true. I think that so many writers are terrified sometimes of just plain losing their jobs or something. So they're very attentive to their editors who have a certain point of view, and say, now you've got to, you know, let's not
let's not go too far on this.
That's right.
Let's come back this way.
And of course, there are critics who won't do that, and there are good editors who allow their critics to have their say. But it depends on the personality of this critic, if he is daring enough to make honest judgment and honest opinions. And it's true what you say, is that many of them gloss over and would rather be friendly with the artist than be true to himself.
It doesn't help the cause of art to do that.
No, it
that's
doesn't.
what disturbs me. I mean, it seems like everybody should be in it together to advance the cause of art. I realize that's an idealistic position, but everybody should be within each individual trying to advance their own career and make a niche for themselves, should be trying to contribute to the art world as a whole.
I suppose that's the ideal. You know, we're not living in an ideal age.
Certainly aren't. Far
but
from it.
idealism is here to stay. We must not lose it.
Now, to not ignore your most recent book published by Macmillan on Giancarlo Menotti, how did this come about? We have about a minute and a half
Yes,
to...
well, that was very simple. I had written a book on Leonard Bernstein called The Private World of Leonard Bernstein, and Mr. Menotti apparently had heard that I had done this book. It was very successful, and he called Macmillan, and he suggested, Menotti himself suggested that I be the person to write it. And so Macmillan contacted me and said, will you do this book? And I said, with pleasure. And I spent 2 years talking to Menotti and 50,000 people practically. And in this book you have the entire life story of this very marvelous composer, who turns out to be a fascinating man as well. So that's how that happened, and the book, I hope, will be instructive for all those who love Amal and The Night Visitors and all those wonderful works of his.
Does it deal equally with his life and his work?
Yes, it's one of the most candid books on a living composer that I would say quite objectively exists. He has a very strange and interesting life. He is not afraid to speak his mind. He talks candidly about his personal life, and I don't think any composer living today has ever been as frank and honest as Menotti, because he is not a married man. And so it's quite a book, I would say.
Well, I appreciate honesty, I think, almost above anything else, and dedication of people to their field, and you certainly are that, and it sounds like a fascinating book. We didn't mention a couple of other books in your repertoire here, The Private World of Ballet.
Yes, that's a collection of interviews with many, many stars of the ballet. Name them, 75 of them. Choreographers and great dancers from Nureyev to Baryshnikov to the young ones, and it's in a paperback now. It's a penguin-backed paperback called The Private World of Ballet, and it's used, it's bought, and it's, I hope, loved.
Well, I'm sure they will be. There are a wide variety of interesting books written by John Gruen, my guest and artist and critic today, both in the world of art and in the world of dance. Please look for his reviews and articles in Art News, in Dance Magazine, in the Sunday New York Times. Listen to his weekly radio program on the dance on WNCN Sundays from 10 to 11, and read his books. He's a fascinating fellow. We'll have him back again. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Don Gray.